everyone. We will now begin the webinar. This is a highly subscribed to webinar. We've got 50 people on the line already, and there are still people joining. So thank you for sparing your time and your interest in this session. It's how to lead effectively in crisis that we'll be talking about this afternoon. So first of all, some introductions. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm Jonathan Hemus. I'm the Managing Director of Insignia. We're a specialist crisis management consultancy. We work with leaders of businesses around the world to help them do and say the right things on the most challenging days of their business lives. And I'm really pleased to be joined this afternoon by Sean Cunningham from Vestas. Sean and I have been in the same kind of LinkedIn groups and the same crisis management online forums, but I only got to hear Sean speak and to meet him at the Crisis Minds conference a couple of months ago. And what he said at that conference really resonated with me. And so I thought I would love to have Sean on one of our regular webinars to share those insights. I think it's fair to say that Sean has clear and strong views about what good crisis management looks like, and as I say, I really wanted him to share some of those thoughts with you on this call. But Sean, perhaps if you could tell us a little bit more about your background, please.
Yeah, certainly, Jonathan. Hello, everyone. So, Sean Cunningham, I'm, as it says, Group Crisis Manager at Vestas. Vestas are the largest suppliers and manufacturers and servicers of wind turbines in the world, and so it's a very interesting job. But I got there via quite a strange route. 30 years in policing in London, where I ended up as head of the hostage and crisis negotiation unit. So and in that role I was an advisor to the UK government on international hostage taking, where British subjects were concerned, but we actually dealt with many multinational situations. Did other things such as working on the flying squad for armed robbery and kidnapped senior investigating officer and football violence at one point. After I left the police, after I'd done my 30 years, I went to a gambling company and was director of security for 5 years in a gambling company, which was really interesting. Learned a lot about money laundering, and it really was a kind of psychological laboratory for watching people's behaviour. A short stint in a small boutique consultancy, and then 5 years with Control Risks, where I taught FTSE companies and fortune companies kidnap management and crisis management. And particularly after COVID, I moved everything into online training and took kidnap training online and took over the crisis management training. And then Vestas came and asked, would I come and work for them? Which has made me the luckiest person alive, because Vestas didn't have a real crisis management program, and they've allowed me to do what I want to do. So as Jonathan says, I have a few opinions, many of which are probably wrong, but they've been built up over years of watching other people. So I'm quite happy to share them now.
Thanks, Sean. So 2 or 3 minutes of context before I start throwing some questions in Sean's direction. We have a chat about this important topic. So I mentioned that I really wanted to get Sean to talk with you this afternoon. And I have to say that for me, leadership and how to get the best out of your crisis management team is a real personal passion. And it is a personal passion because it links directly back to Insignia's purpose. And in fact, this is my purpose as well as Insignia's purpose. Our aim ultimately is to prevent the harm to lives, livelihoods, business and reputation caused by a mishandled crisis. And in my experience, the biggest cause of a mishandled crisis is through the missteps of the crisis management team, and in particular their leaders. And whilst a crisis management plan or a robust process is essential, I believe, for you to succeed in a crisis, and it should underpin your response to a crisis. It is ultimately what people do and say in that most challenging time when crisis strikes that will determine whether lives, livelihoods, business and reputation are protected and preserved, or in the worst case, severely damaged. So this is a really important topic to me, and one that I think makes the biggest difference in terms of success or failure in crisis. And you know, it's something that Richard Branson has talked about. Obviously, he had the rail crash in the Lake District a number of years ago. He had the spacecraft crash in the Mojave Desert. So he's had his share of crises to deal with, and I would concur with his view here. The test of a company's leadership, and of a CEO in particular, usually comes during a crisis. It requires a very specific kind of leadership, management and personal performance, which is different to business as usual. And of course, in those circumstances, we have seen successful, highly regarded, highly valued businesses and highly experienced, highly respected leaders sometimes dramatically fail on that most challenging day. Equally, you see the best of organizations and the best of leaders in a crisis. And my first, I guess, crisis management hero was Michael Bishop, who you see on the right-hand side, towards the right-hand side of the photo on the left. For those of you who are as old as me, you may recall the Kegworth air crash. A lot of people lost their lives, but what struck me was what an effective leader Sir Michael Bishop was in that situation. He was controlling, leading in that crisis from the very first hour, both by his actions and his decisions, also by the way he communicated and the way that he demonstrated his empathy and his emotional intelligence as a leader through visiting those in hospital, caring for their families, and as I say, doing and saying the right thing throughout. So some rise to that challenge and some don't. So we're now going to have a chat for 30-40 minutes with Sean. Please do post your own questions. I've got a number of things that I would like to ask Sean, but you will have your opportunity too. So please do post those to the question panel for answering later on. So Sean, in your view, why is it that some leaders rise to the challenge of a crisis and others falter?
In my humble opinion, I would say I don't think it's their fault. I don't think it's the leader's fault that they falter. I think they've actually been brought up in a system that is wrong. I don't think the leaders and the leadership we have today, I find leadership an element, there's an element of cult about leadership now. Everyone seems to be jumping on the bandwagon. Every ex-cop and ex-soldier seems to come out and know exactly what's missing everywhere, and they don't. And the disciplines are completely different. You know, when you're in public service like the police or the military, your job is fairly safe. You know, the worst thing they could do to you as a policeman was probably send you back to direct traffic. We always used to joke. When you actually come out to the private sector, what you realise is there's a real fear. People are living with fear every day about their jobs. And because of that, they make distorted decisions. Mm-hmm. So when you're growing up in an organisation, you don't have a guaranteed way of getting up the tree or educating yourself as you move on and progress through, you know, up the promotional tree. So you watch other people, and all you're learning are the mistakes and the errors they made, and then you're picking the ones that suit you and not the ones that don't. So there is no one standard. I'm at the moment I'm using when I'm talking to people, I use Liz Truss, the Prime Minister of 44 Days, and a little bit like the example you gave of your man from BP, the most honest leaders in the world, because they actually admit it's all about them. And you know, when your Branson quote comes up, I just noted it down. He said, it's about leadership and CEOs, and that's what gets tested. Well, that's where I think it's wrong. There's a process for dealing with crisis. It's the process that should be tested. The human beings are second, and there's a degree of arrogance there that that comes with that leadership. There's one thing I have not done, and I'm really tempted to do it as an experiment with a group of people that I'm lecturing, which is I don't know if you've ever seen the heads and tails game that people sometimes play at Christmas. Everybody stands up, you put your hands on your head or your hands on your backside, and someone tosses a coin. And eventually, after 10 tosses of the coin, you're left with one person who's made all the right decisions. Well, that's effectively the CEO. All they've done is guess right as they've gone through. Now, it's facetious to say that, because I've got good friends who are the top of organisations, and I only say it to them with a drink in hand. But that's effectively, they make a good decision. And there's a thing in Thinking About Bets by Annie Duke, who says there's a lot of resulting. There's a lot of, when you make a decision, people judge it based on the result. Well, that's rubbish, because you make the decision without knowing the result. So you can't say the result is necessarily connected. And that's the problem you've got. So you've got people in high positions that probably haven't been tested strongly enough, and yet they're left making decisions in normal business. And then when it comes to a crisis, they think it's something special. And my whole thing here is about, it's not something special. It's something you should have practiced for like you practice for normal business. There are subtle differences, but they're easy to learn.
So maybe I can ask you, what are those key differences between succeeding in business as usual and succeeding in crisis?
Well, so business as usual is like being a sound engineer at a concert. You need to bring the singer up at times, you need to bring the drummer up at times, you need a complete blend, you can't blast it out, it's got to be in tune with the music. But you're balancing 5 or 6 different things. So you're actually weighing up the objectives of 5 or 6 different musicians, or more than that, at any one time. As soon as it's a crisis, and I sort of hate the word crisis, I'd like to get rid of it. As soon as it's a crisis, single objective. And this is where I'm having some serious arguments with the top of my organization, who hate the fact that I say, just tell me, just give me a single objective. Are we saving the people, or are we saving the business? What are we doing at this point? Nobody likes it, because everyone's used to wriggle room. Everyone is looking at what's going to happen to them and culpability. And I'm saying, no, manage the crisis by giving a clear direction. The one thing you will see in every review you've ever seen or you've ever taken part in is we didn't communicate properly. And when you do an exercise, if the top of the organization is not prepared to make a simple and clear decision and give clear direction, your communication's screwed. It's
something we focus on a lot with our clients. We talk about strategic intent. It's a clear articulation of what success looks like. And to your point, one of the things where, even having been coached on strategic intent, under the pressure of a crisis, organizations can falter, is when that strategic intent isn't a single clear objective. It's actually multiple objectives dressed up as a strategic intent. So I'm very much with you that one clear objective, a very focused objective, it really helps, doesn't it, with decision making and alignment of the team, have everybody, cliche, but singing from the same hymn sheet.
I do a thing at the start of some exercises now where I ask everyone what they're good at. And and a lot of people are saying to me, we've never been asked that question. Yeah. And you'll either get groupthink. So you'll either get someone say, I'm good at problem solving. And I've had a group where actually everyone in the room said they were good at problem solving. And I went, well, that's not very good for managing a situation. To manage a situation doesn't mean you solve the problem. As soon as you present a crisis to people in exercise, they see it like a whodunit dinner. They want to find out who did it and get it sorted and away and off their table as soon as possible. I've just been running a short icebreaker exercise with just small jigsaws. And I just give them jigsaws in groups of 2, 3 or 4. And you just watch people just dive straight in and try and sort the jigsaw out with no talk of strategy, no talk of planning, no stepping back and thinking about it. And if you look online, there's the jigsaw gurus will give you 8 or 9 different points, of which there are 5 sub-points in each one, about doing it on a white background so you can see it, putting the pieces in straight lines, even when you turn them over, and then putting them back in the same place if you pick one up to see whether it fits. So I've been going around photographing my teams doing this, and it's so informative about people not saying, we have a process to do it. I did 5 years at Control Risks, and I could probably, I can't remember anyone who brought their own crisis plan with them to a crisis exercise. Yeah. So someone said, is there a good plan? I said, yeah, there's good plans and bad plans. A bad plan is heavy enough to keep a door open. A good plan is thin enough to stop a table from wobbling. And after that, they're of no use at all. Which is, again, slightly facetious, but it sort of makes my point.
I'm violently agreeing with you on everything that you've said so far. And
we'll find some land.
We will find something, don't worry. One of the things I wanted you to kind of explain, because it's, again, a syndrome I've seen before, might sound obvious, but if an exercise is not about solving the scenario with which you are presented, what is it about?
It's about rehearsing the process. It's about knowing where you are in the level. So I came out of the police, we use gold, silver, bronze. Ambulance service use it, fire service use it. Our gold, silver, bronze in the police was quite often a different level of gold, silver, bronze to the ambulance service. So I come into the private sector where a lot of ex-cops have been, and they've all brought gold, silver, bronze, and it's sort of meaningless. But the 3-tier thing is good. The three-tier thing is good. But if you use the same term, you think you've got correlation with other businesses. So that just needs to stop. But the demarcation between the layers is what is missing. So people don't understand what gold is. And even within policing, people used to brush through the barrier of what was gold. Gold was set the strategy and then go and cut the grass at home and wait until the strategy is going to change. You delegate to a crisis management team who get on to manage it, but not do it. It's the incident team that gets on to do it, and that's for me. So strategic decision body, which at Control Risk they call the decision-making authority, which I thought was bad. And we've gone to strategic decision body because we don't want individuals making the decisions. When Branson says it's the CEO, and bless you, Jonathan, we'll disagree here because your description of a good one highlights one person. Well, that's just, you're building to failure because one person is open to more bias and more leanings and their own nurture. That's disaster for me. Anyone who thinks the Prime Minister makes a decision is a fool, because either their cabal of advisors make it or the cabinet make it, but not them on their own, or else where would we be? I'll leave that one.
Yeah, quite. What are some of the most common mistakes you see crisis management teams and leaders make?
Not knowing the difference between a decision and a task, or a decision and an action. And then conversely, fighting for definitions of stuff that just doesn't matter. So has this crossed the threshold of a crisis? Well, what does it matter? If you're using the same process all the way through, it doesn't matter. So serious incident is a better sort of term, and it's a broader term. So people getting hung up on what is and what isn't. It's not a mistake, it's a human trait. It's Maslowian, isn't it, to say, what's going to happen to me? I'm in danger. So, the Liz Truss thing is when she writes in her book, which coincidentally I saw on LinkedIn, someone put a copy off in the sci-fi and fantasy section, which made me laugh massively. But I'm sort of, and I'm not a Liz Truss fan or supporter, but for her to say, when the Queen dies, for the first thing to say is, why me? For her to think of herself. then to write it down in a book is either incredibly brave or not very aware of how that plays out. But it's the truth. It's the truth. We have a problem. Every business I've worked with has a problem with escalation. So as soon as someone escalates an issue that's going to become an incident or going to become a crisis, the people who receive it, and you can ask them in any training exercise you're doing, what's the first thing you say to the people that have raised this issue with you? And everyone says, I ask them for more information, I ask them what they've done about it, I ask them what they've called already, I ask them who's been hurt, and I always say, did you say thank you for calling me and telling me? Did you ever say well done for calling me and telling me? So we have a natural kind of, as bosses, we book people off from telling us, you know?
Absolutely.
And if we could actually, if the one thing, all crisis management, if you just change one thing and got bosses to say well done to their staff for raising an issue with them, it might just move the wheel towards what your aspiration is on your second slide.
You can't manage a crisis if you're not aware that it's happening, can you? So that escalation.
You spend your life putting them off. So my team and I, the people I work with, I am a single entity, even in a business of 30,000. The team I work with and I sat down and we tried to work out how escalation works within our own company. And effectively, an incident or issue occurs and it gets slung up the tree to a strategic decision body who say, we own this, here's an objective, pick a crisis manager. Rubbish, absolute rubbish. What actually happens is the people on the ground floor see the crisis and try and deal with it and go, let's deal with it before we tell anyone. And then when they can't, they tell a supervisor who tries to deal with it. And when he or she can't, then they raise it to a level who want to own it. But some of them are saying, intent-based leadership, well, why haven't you made a decision about this? Because we're telling you, because it's to such a scale. So yeah, there's a huge bit. Escalation would be it's not going to solve everything, but it will improve masses of businesses to create a business whereby the bosses enjoy and welcome. Steve Kerr, who's an American who does a lot of stuff, was an emergency services planner or what have you. He always says, embrace the chaos. I used to say I'm never going to write a book, and I am not going to write a book, but the title of my book would be Enjoy the Crisis, you know, and I've heard people get slagged off for using that term because they've used it at a politically inappropriate moment. But unless you enjoy using a crisis, unless your art is the process and making the process work, and then making creative decisions within it, not making creative decisions from the outset.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, I was struck by something you said 3 or 4 minutes ago, and for the benefit of clarity, what is the difference between a decision and an action?
So a decision is like the law. It's the parameter upon which you base all of your actions. So a decision made by a crisis management team would be, and let me use an old police term, we'll extend a search. So if we have a missing child, you extend a search to certain places. That's a decision. The tactical decisions are, the tasks are, now go and look in those places, go and search those rooms, go and search those. So that's the difference. There's a friend of mine who's trying to change the meeting culture in our business. It's all sanctioned by management, and it's a really good thing, using an app called Decisions, which goes alongside Teams. And he describes it as, the decision is we're going to paint the wall yellow. Yeah. The rationale is yellow's a brighter colour, people will stop walking into the wall. The tasks, the actions are, buy the brush, buy the paint, get some overalls, do the work. That's a beautiful way of describing the difference between a decision and a task. And then everyone comes back to you and says, sorry, Jonathan, everyone comes back, but every task is a decision. Yes, I know that, but a decision is like your law. It's like your policy for what you do.
No, I was just going to observe, everything you're talking about is about clarity and discipline and focus and structure, which are so important in crisis management.
Well, Vestas is for, and I'll never get them right, this is like a politician trying to remember your pledge card, but it's like, for us, it's simplicity, collaboration, accountability, and passion. And it doesn't matter what your values are. I've seen so many values in different businesses, but actually Vestas have got it right. They've kept it simple. It's 4 words. You can attach them to anything you like, and it works. So simplicity is where I've got to educate 30,000 people to try and do things the same way. Because if they try and do things the same way, the collaboration gets better, the communication gets better. It's more effective financially for the business, and it's more effective in saving lives.
Yeah. So how do you see the role of the chair in a crisis management team?
As a facilitator. So when the top of an organisation puts someone in as the chair, they quite often are putting a fall guy in, and they're saying, you know, that's the person we're going to nail after this if they don't get it right. That's where the blame's going to. But that shows the naivety of or it's not the naivety, it shows the way that people have been brought up to this point. What we need to do is change it. You would not have a crisis management team of 10 and say that one brain is better than those 9. That's just insanity, but that's the way we work. And not only that, every business I've ever worked with has got a culture where the 9 sit there staring at the chair. So the chair is like being stared at by the strategic decision body, and the chair is being stared at by everyone on the team. It's the team that are the fuel. The team are the brains, you know, where it's like this linking of computers. You're going to get more brain power. So it's cultivating that and allowing the chair, stopping the chair from saying the first thing that comes into their head. So many chairs, you educate them on this thing called the availability heuristic, where they talk about, you know, we've got to decide whether to go left or right here. I'm telling you that right's the right way. What do you think? Well, you've made the decision, pal. Let's just, out of curiosity, we'll follow you and see where it goes, you know. The Cialdini Institute. So when I was a hostage negotiator, a lot of our training came from sales, and the Cialdini Institute has been set up, published something about 6 months ago that I thought was absolutely brilliant. And it was use your advisors last. In other words, don't bring an expert in, because everyone then sits there and looks at the expert and goes, right, what do we do? Tell us what to do. And I've had chief operating officers say that to me in other businesses, just say, you know, right, tell me which way I'm going. I don't need to know the rest of it. Well, you're making the decision. You know, look at COVID, and every government was balancing between the finance and the health. Because if you don't have the fight, you're not going to carry on. So there is no point, you know. But everyone, and that's where people needed to understand what the politician's job was. So most politicians would stand there. If you stood with 2 doctors, as ours sometimes did, wrong. But you should have the finance person saying, we need more money, we want to do this, we want to do that. And you should have the health person saying, we want to do this, we want to do that. And Annie Duke again uses something that Tetlock and Lerner, I think, wrote about in one of their papers years ago, which is 2 to disagree and 1 to referee. And that's the job of the chair. You know, your team, get some heat amongst your team, get them fighting, get them arguing, get them putting their different points of view, and then you arbitrate, you crystallize the decision of the group, and then go forward with that.
And what personal qualities or characteristics would the ideal crisis team chair have?
So for me, it's not having a specialism in whatever the crisis is. So there's no inbuilt bias. If you look at Waco in Texas, there was a huge amount of study on that. I mean, that was the big thing before 9/11 for that sort of study. And of course, the decision was made on the basis of their skills, abilities, and what they knew, rather than the circumstances in front of them. So, and I've sat at Cobra, and you quite often look at the chair and go, well, why is that person chairing? But it's because they could arbitrate, could listen to everything, you know. It was better that they had nothing there with them. And Maslow, there's another great Maslow quote that a good friend of mine, James, taught me, which is, when all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And that's what a lot of chairs are, you know. If you have a cyber crisis in your company, don't put a cyber person in the chair, because all they'll deal with is the cyber, and whenever it comes, they'll revert, not by human nature, they'll revert to the area they know and are comfortable with, and that's not what you want.
What about the CEO as chair of the team? Obviously, there are different CEOs with different qualities, but as a general principle, would you want them as the chair or not want them as the chair?
It depends on the size of your business. It depends on the scale of the crisis. There's two different types of crisis, ones you own and ones you don't. You know, a crisis you own would be something within your remit. Then I wouldn't see the CEO managing it, because the CEO needs to manage the whole business. You know, she needs to take that kind of idea on and say, I've bubbled that off, I've delegated it, I've given it to experts. I mean, there's still a huge amount of mistrust, or we've built leaders to not trust the people that they've promoted into positions. We've built leaders who don't actually see people below them as better than them. I know there's exceptions to that, but there is a kind of, if you've called it heads 15 times and that's come up right and you've ended up as the CEO, well, who's to say you're wrong? You know, that's a really difficult thing. That's a really difficult thing.
I'm going to start throwing in some of the questions from the audience. I've got a number of others, but I think a number of them have been stimulated by what you've said already. So before there's too much distance, first question from Andy is, to what extent do you think leadership ability is a fundamental personality trait versus a skill set that you can learn?
I go back to what I was saying earlier. I think leadership's a bit of a cult. People have a fixed view about what leadership is. Leadership isn't telling people what to do necessarily. It is in an incident. So in an incident, if you're at a fire and you're there and your team are around you and there's people dying and this sort of thing, you actually need someone who's going to skillfully use logical fallacies. You need someone who's going to lie, someone who's going to say, we're going to do this, come on, up and at them, and who's naturally going to be followed. But that's in the heat of the crisis, when you're feeling the flames against you. In a crisis management setting, I want a facilitator who's going to get the best out of that group. What I try to educate all the crisis management teams is that the chair is there to get the team to work and produce the best and most, and what I mean by the best is the most robust decisions they can make. So decisions that they make where they're aware of a risk. I'm now trying to educate people to write not a kind of, here's my rationale. I was doing it as 1, 2, 3 points of rationale, which is sort of confirmation bias. You know, I'm going this way because this, and this. And then I started to say, right, do a negative rationale. People were finding that really difficult. So I then said, just write one of the risks about turning left. If we turn left, we're never going to know what happens. You know, we're going to miss other opportunities. Brilliant. Just write that down. Because all I want people to understand is that you're aware of the risk. And that keeping of a log is, I had a real problem with Jessup. Just after Manchester, we were looking at the Jessup site. And the reason for keeping a log at that time on the Jessup site was so that you could be reviewed afterwards and lawyers could look at it. And a friend and I, Dino and I, wrote to them, had a little side bet and said, this will be months before we hear. We wrote to them and said, this is absolutely wrong. A log is there to achieve the objective of the crisis team, nothing else. As a secondary purpose, it gets reviewed. We got a reply in bless them, we got a reply in half an hour. You're not the first people, nobody ever is. And they have changed, they've taken that out, and that wasn't me, that was other people. But it's been massively wrong. The whole view of logs has been seen as a stick to beat you, and it's not. It's because a crisis isn't over tomorrow and May. Sorry, I rumble on with these things, so I might get away from the question. Pull me back.
No, that's fine. I'm kind of building on the question, which was, you know, about leading the team, and you've talked about facilitation being the most important thing. How, as the chair of a team, do you manage the time available to you? You've talked about good disciplines in terms of decision making and evaluating the risks. How do you achieve that balance between getting as much information as possible, having the most robust and rigorous discussion around decisions, and yet moving sufficiently quickly to stay ahead of the crisis?
You're never going to do that unless you've trained the team. So if the team, and so I bet when you've run a crisis exercise, any of you that are listening, you've run a crisis exercise, and okay, so we want to know, what do we think, should we go left or right? George goes, well, what I was thinking was, if we do, and then George takes up about all the oxygen in the room and about half an hour while he muses through what he's thinking. Now, I've been in quite a few government crisis meeting rooms, and the rules effectively are you have 30 seconds and you make your point. You do not, you can use tricks like buying time by just taking your glasses off and just having a quick look and put them back on and go, right, I've had time to think, and then you go through it. But effectively at Cobra, we were all trying to get 3 points that were, or 1 or 2 is better. A winning argument is 1 point. It's a thing I learned from lawyers throughout the years as a policeman. If they've got a winning argument, it's normally 1 sentence, and they tell you it, and they tell you where you screwed up, and you go, all right, we throw the towel in. If they don't have a winning argument, they talk for hours and try and bluster everybody. You've got to stop the bluster. You train the team as to what to do and what their role is. So one of the instructions I have is for team members. I've just actually, a colleague of mine, we're running a crisis coordinators course. That's another thing. I was really anti the crisis coordinator. And I've had to eat my words, because you need someone on the shoulder of the chair, so that pre the meeting, the agenda's set with the log keeper, then you go into the meeting. Mikhail, who's doing the kind of meeting culture for us, calls it a facilitator. It's someone who runs the process of the meeting, so helps it along, because we're not naturally good at. My life's ambition, my legacy would be to get rid of coordinators, because they're just a waste of money and they're redundant and they should go. But humans are humans, they need that. But there's a huge amount in training. If you train the team, rather than think of the chair, how does the chair do it? It's not the chair's job, it's the team member's job to shut up or to give their point succinctly, like I'm not doing here. I'm very aware.
You touched on your experience in kind of government and public sector. There's a question from Colin on that, which is, how do leaders in the public sector navigate the bureaucratic minefield during a crisis? Any thoughts on that?
That's a cracker. Yeah. So one of the departments that I work with have set chairs, so they're not specialists in any environment. So, and I'd never see, I mean, I'm trying to write at the moment, I have written one before, chair training. So I'm actually going to try and educate the business around that. But the chairs, I'm doing a talk for someone and they asked me, who's influenced you the most? And it is a woman who chaired Cobra, who was just fantastic. And yeah, I think that's, so I'm just trying to be careful. So when you can watch people like that and you see what they've done, they are fully immersed in the bureaucracy. They know what's what. They've grown up through that, so they're seasoned in that. At that meeting, once you're in a crisis team, you have the power to cut through. For me, when I educate people around, so I learned a lot from people at Liverpool University about decision making, all the people in the class I was in and the professors there, like Lawrence Allison and Jonathan Crago. And the best decisions are the ones that kill policy. So you either have to make a decision where there is no policy, because otherwise you just follow the policy, or the crisis is such a new and inventive one that you actually have to breach the policy that's there and then justify it. And that's what the best chairs within the civil service can do. They just go, that policy's had its day, I won't swear. And then we just say, no, we'll do this. And I've seen the chairs do that live, and that's brilliant. Everyone wakes up, everyone loves it when that happens.
Yeah, I'm going to flip the coin here, because we've got a question about the private sector from Ree, who says in the private sector, the exec level gold priorities tend to lean towards revenue generation, sustainability, customer satisfaction, etc. How do you get the executive really engaged with the importance of crisis management to help develop a culture of this across the business?
With difficulty and slowly, and stop thinking, Sean Cunningham, that you're better than you are because what you're saying is right, and understand that is a super tanker that needs to change slowly. So I'm into doing with my exec. I do twice a year sessions with them, and in the second year I'm listening to stuff that I said to them before, so they're taking it on and they're moving it that way.
Yeah.
The other thing I would say is you've got to find some low-hanging fruit. So you've got to have successes in other places. And where I've had a modicum of success is that the crisis management framework, because I don't have a plan, the framework that I've marketed has now been asked for in tricky, intractable problems, because it brings structure and it brings it. And so once it's got a few successes behind it, then you can push it on.
Yeah. And I think this is probably the same point you just made, Sean, but one of the things that we find is when you put really good processes and mechanisms in place for crisis management, we often find clients adopting those processes and frameworks for business as usual situations. And so one, that demonstrates the value of those processes, but two, because they're getting ingrained in business as usual, they are more likely to be used successfully in a crisis. So got a question from Rachel. You mentioned that the decision as to whether it is a crisis at Vestas is decided by a strategic decision board. How does this step impact the speed of response?
So it's strategic decision body. Sorry, I'm not a semantic king, but that's what it is. I'm training strategic decision bodies to make their decisions within 15 minutes. Right. And they've 5 decisions to make, which are, do we own this crisis? So a non-owned crisis is a pandemic or a war like Russia, Ukraine, or, you know, those are crises that are not just not just your business. You're actually having to manage your business or part of your business through a changing environment. So that's a different style of crisis, which may, in a smaller scale business, may include the CEO. You know, a fire at a plant, or a number of deaths, or a cyber hack are internal. You own them, and therefore you're making the decision. So those need to be bubbled off and put in a different, you know, in a part of the organisation. You effectively build a new unit and let it go on and deal with it. So it's ownership, it's the scale, and the scale, most people on a business our size straight away go for geography. And I'm trying to educate people that you need to look at scale in terms of geography, yes, seriousness, so tsunami, 9/11, big financial crash, and then sensitivity. So, you know, one of the examples I use is one that's come up quite frequently, I think, in the UK, is the use of WhatsApp groups by groups of predominantly men in organisations who are doing sex texting or what have you, you know. Yeah. And when that's there, that's an extremely sensitive issue. So what that does is that allows you to pick. So the next thing you do is you pick your chair. So you either confirm the chair that's in place or you pick a new chair. But the scale is given you, this is where we're placing this in the business. And then you
all anybody
give
I don't know if anyone could. Here we go. You're back, I think. And now I'm not hearing it. I did hear you when you said I have.
Now am I back in? Yes.
You are now back in. Excellent.
So just quickly, it was, you know, do you own it? What's the scale? Pick a chair or confirm the chair, give them a single objective, and then determine the resources. And that determining the resources is a really interesting thing, because a lot of organisations have been saying, we've got a crisis, run it alongside your day job. And that's been a constant reflection back in reviews, is I can't do both. You know, I'm giving weaker performance in both. So you've actually got to say, no, white blood cells, off you go. You're going into that room, or you're going. We pretty much run all of our crises online. Absolutely, all of our crises are run online.
Got a load of questions, and we'll try and crack through as many of them as possible. How would you persuade a senior crisis leadership team member, maybe on a one-to-one basis, in training or discussion to engage with the process when they think they don't really need training?
That's a tough one, because I'm really lucky in that I've got some really high-level support. Again, it's not something you're going to do overnight. You know, persuasion and negotiation like that takes time. Yeah. And so don't think you're going to go in and solve that problem immediately. So you find your champions, and then when you do a training session, so the last training session I did for our execs, they turned around and have asked for more. And that's when you know you're getting success. But you're not going, I didn't get that on the first one. You know, I came out of the first one with my boss, and we sat down and we debriefed over a coffee and a sticky bun and went, well, where did that go wrong? Because it didn't go right. And actually it did go right. We just didn't see that we were making those first steps. You do need a sponsor, but you don't need a sponsor who's going to shout for you all the time. I think the other thing is, I know someone who went off to be a security person in a perfume company, and the CEO pulled them because it was like a fiefdom and they were using it. And he says, I hear you went down and picked a dead rat up from the car park this morning. And the security person says, yeah, because that's not your job. He goes, yeah, but it doesn't matter, I can do it. And so there's a lot of, you have to get outside of your zone and just you help absolutely everyone. I mean, I'm doing things, I'm doing it at different levels. I give people prizes after a crisis management session. So I give them printed mugs, or I give them a certificate, or I've printed my escalation process on beer mats, and so everyone's getting these things, and I'm getting them to put them out on Viva Engage, you know, one of these Yammer type things. Yeah. And so that's starting to, I'm poisoning the water with, that's a probably bad analogy at this time, but that's what I'm doing. And then the top of the organization, it's amazing how even people at the top of the organization for a printed mug can smug it over their friends, and then that's just, you just use those small psychological steps, but it's not a quick process. Bit like my answers, Jonathan, not quick.
One from Charlie here. Why don't you like the word crisis? Is it because most incidents are not crises, and so the word becomes meaningless?
No, I think the word's meaningless from the outset because everybody wants a box to put something into, and it's not. A crisis can be something as not low level, but you get the death of an employee and people are saying that's not a crisis, you know. Right. And so you say to them, how many people is it before it is a crisis? Or it just doesn't bring anything with it. When I ask people, what does the word crisis do for you? Some people say, oh, it opens up doors, it allows funding streams to come through, it allows this, it allows that. I've just not seen that. All I've seen is more people run for the hills because it's career threatening. And it's back to, you know, it's that thing about 9/11. Why did people run? We used to run to dangerous situations because it was a laugh. We thought it was fun. We'd go into fights in football matches because we thought it was fun. We'd go and arrest burglars who were not armed because we thought it was fun. Outside, there's a lot of career protection. There's a lot of, I'm not going to make that decision because it puts me at risk. And your dad, you know, people are famous in the military for some of the screw ups they made. You know, there was a fireman who had a gap in a building line named after him because he didn't bring enough pumps to it and the building collapsed. And so it was known as, it didn't damage him because he had the experience then to use that in other places. And the private sector doesn't do that as well for me.
Would you recommend a different chair depending on the individual crisis situation?
Just a chair who's not involved is my perfect thing. A chair with no baggage in it. We've had a crisis recently where one of the team members, not the chair, but has
Yeah.
become slightly embroiled in the crisis themselves, and that person's had to be removed. But because he's so emotionally, because they're all a team, they found it really hard to make that decision. So as a coordinator, it was really easy to say, sorry, this is a no-brainer. You can't have that person in there because they're just going to screw your decision making.
One more here. Do you recommend a crisis coordinators course? If so, what would you recommend including in it?
So the one I've been writing this morning is 3 days. Starts off that we learned from last year's. We didn't outline to everyone all of the elements of the course. So we needed to do that because we thought people already had an accepted understanding of it. More exercising. So we've an exercise after lunch every day. We've introduced tests so that people start to use the lexicon. And they're really simple. They're no-brainer tests. You know, it should be 80%. But they're just using Microsoft Forms, a quick quiz on every day. And because I'm now 2 years into my role, I've got some successes. So I've got case studies with people that have, so some of the crisis coordinators I trained last year have undertaken the reviews. We've got a really short review process now, designed originally by my boss, which is, I like to say it was rubbish, but it wasn't, it was good. And it's so nice. So we had a review done by one of the big four, and we had 139 recommendations in report 1. And probably the same in report 2, which I didn't see because that was about a different aspect of it. So this thing about a big report, we do between 3 and 5 recommendations when we review a crisis, because you're never going to implement them otherwise, and no one's ever going to check them. So yeah, the review process is big. The crisis coordinators, independent crisis coordinators, do the reviews, and you build a team with them. And we give them an award, which is a little fake Roman coin with memento mori on it. So memento mori was my Latin's non-existent, but it was when a Roman soldier used to return after beating the French or the Germans or whoever, and they'd have a tribute to them as they came into Rome. They'd have a slave on the back of the chariot holding the laurel wreath above their head, saying, "Remember, you're only human," just to keep you thinking about. And that's the crisis coordinator's job. So they all get a coin with that on it, a badly designed coin designed by a friend of mine. So yeah, memento mori, just remember you're human. And that's what the CEOs need, that's what your chairs need, that's what your strategic decision body needs.
Fantastic. There are questions that we're not going to get through, I'm afraid. I've got one that I wanted to ask you before moving on to briefly another topic before 2 o'clock. Your 3 top tips. What would be the 3 most important things that people should think about or take away to enable crisis management teams to perform successfully, Sean?
Don't try and change them overnight like I thought I could do. Start to get a catchphrase. Sir Ian Blair, who was a commissioner of the Metropolitan Police, I heard him 42 times saying the same thing over and over again. And all he was trying to do was get his message through. So even though you might be bored with the message, you got to keep it going. And you're just trying to cultivate. If you get a small win, celebrate it. Don't just go, oh well, that was easy, because things always look easier once you've done them. They're not. Yeah. If you get a small change in culture, if you can bring in an escalation process where your management or supervisors say, "Thank you for calling me. Ring me and tell me how you do it," because that is gold.
Fantastic. Thank you. Sean, that was brilliant. Not only have we had more people register and join this webinar than any other webinar before, we've also had more questions than ever before, to the extent that we've got a number that we've just not had time to answer. So thank you everyone on the call for your input. Actually building on what Sean has just said about things that you can do maybe to be more effective and more successful in your roles as those responsible for crisis management, I would love to use this group to run something past you and also get your feedback. Building on our crisis management conference last September, and a more recent client panel. And actually all three people who were on that panel, Harry, Tom and Rachel, are also on this call. The idea of an Insignia curated crisis management forum or crisis management network arose. It would be a place for senior people within the area of crisis management, those who are responsible for crisis management within their own organization. It would be membership only, and it would have things like a quarterly face-to-face event, whether that's a lunch or a breakfast, which would feature things like guest speakers, insights on crisis management, and I think critically the opportunity to meet and talk openly with the kind of peers that are on this webinar. Also, virtual discussions or mastermind groups. There was another question on securing executive engagement, for example, that we didn't get a chance to go to, and maybe we could have, you know, an hour-long online discussion about, well, how did you do that at this organization? And Insignia, what have you seen? And Jane, how have you achieved that so successfully at your organization? It would have, of course, some kind of online forum or a LinkedIn group or a members-only section of our website. It could have a monthly newsletter with insights into breaking crises, a barometer of the latest risk landscape, annual benchmarking report. How do I stack up in terms of the number of exercises I'm doing versus those that my peers are doing? And it would integrate the conference that we ran last year. So, Catherine, if you could launch the poll, I'd just be really interested as to whether that is something that you would be interested in, the people on this call. It would have a membership fee, which would really be about covering costs, venue costs, etc. So maybe £1,000 to £2,000 for a year's membership. Catherine, if you could launch that poll, please, and if you would just answer for me, is that something that in principle you might be interested in, yes or no? So we'll leave that poll open. Not going to hold you to anything at this stage, but it will just give us confidence to go with it if there is interest there. So 3/4 of you have voted. That will give you another 10 seconds to put your vote forward. Another 5. We're up to, yeah, over 3/4 have voted now. Okay. Thank you. For those of you who are interested, 85% of you said yes. So that certainly gives us the confidence to continue the development work that we're doing, and you should expect to hear more about that over the coming weeks and months. So again, I wanted to thank Sean once more for today's session. It was a great discussion. We've got one person, Sean, saying that they would definitely buy the book. So Enjoy the Crisis might need to be written after all. You've definitely got one sale there already from Paul.
My mum again.
So thank you so much. Thank you to everyone who joined and who participated so fully in the discussion. And as always, if you want more information or if there are questions that didn't get answered that you would like to post to either me or for onward transmission to Sean, please do that. My contact details are in this QR code. Thank you all so much. I wish you a pleasant and a crisis-free afternoon. Thanks very much, everyone.